onto tonight and Alexei. Now what we're going to do is watch some of, a good chunk of this interview with Alexei that we did in 2009, and then we'll have Alexei to fill us in on what wasn't in the interview, and of course field questions from all you guys. And here's Alexei, of course. So grab a couple of cookies before we start.
I think he wants to say something. Do you want to speak?
Did you want to say something now, Alexei? Or?
No, I'll do it after.
Right.
All right. Thank you for
words, more action.
Okay. What a legacy you've left us here. It's really quite amazing. So concise and so it's all there. So much is there. So have a seat, okay, and let's see what you didn't tell us on the film. I'll open it up with Alexei. Before, I would love to hear you talk a little more about, before the evening started, we were out on the street and Alexei was just telling me this very telling story.
Well, we had to be really cautious that we didn't break any of the laws in the city of Los Angeles, because they would use that against us. People were throwing trash on the streets, not all the time, but occasionally. But if we had dropped one of our flyers, we went to, well, first of all, we got our flyers, we went to Postal Instant Press, in case anyone's old enough to remember that organization. Because most people didn't have copiers, nor computers to set this stuff up. So we used to set up flyers and take them to Postal Instant Press and have 1,000 thrown off. And we used those to pass out as people were passing us. But if we had dropped one on the street, or the people that we gave it to had dropped it, we didn't run over and pick it up, they would have used that to close us down. You know, the day of the demonstration, there were supposed to be 5 different groups that were going to demonstrate. There was the black community, there was the Latino community, and there were anti-war demonstrators, and we all had it set up that that day, February 11th, we were going to all demonstrate in our own neighborhoods. We and one other group were the groups that did demonstrate that day. The others, it petered out. It didn't happen. On the Sunset Strip, they had approximately maybe 2,000 people or 1,000 people up there demonstrating. That came off. That was against police brutality. Where we were, we had 300 to 600 men and women demonstrating in front of the Black Cat. And around to where the parking lot is and up and down the block. And we had to keep moving. And just about 2 or 3 years ago, there's a little group of young gay men that's called the Roots of Equality. And they had a get-together with the police commission downtown at some little meeting place, and I was there. And the chief of police was there, and a couple of his captains were there, and a couple of them were gay and lesbian. And I stood up to introduce myself and to thank them for what they're doing with the police department now. And I said, but the last time I was in a room with this many cops, it was away. So anyway, but our history is strange. And my history of being in touch with things came from this man, Mother Bryan. Now you gotta understand, I don't know Mother Bryan's real name. And the truth was, at the time I last saw him, he was 86 years old. And he was the one that impressed me so much. to change my life, that I no longer was ashamed of who I was, or feeling inferior or some way that I had to hide. Now, I had an easy coming out because I had a parent who was in show business. And that little group I spoke about were a group of people that used to hang out off of 42nd Street. And it was 6th Avenue and 42nd Street around Bryant Park. We called ourselves the Trunkers. And it ran from about 9 years old to about 14. Because we all were born in the trunk. And our parents were all in show business. You know, my babysitters when I was younger were Lily St. Cyr, Sally Rand, because my mother trusted the Burlicues and didn't trust other people to take care of them. So when she was on stage, I was over at their theater. And I remember being up in that box up there while Lily St. Cyr was performing. Now, they had golden garters, and when they would take it off, you know, it's funny, nobody ever saw them naked. Never. They had fans, they had things, they had an act, all of that. They were wonderful women, as you saw in the thing, the portrayal in Gypsy, the strippers there. Anyway, they had these garters, and they were very expensive to have made. And I would be in the box up there, and they were supposed to throw it out to the audience after their performance. So they had it like this, and all the people were there, and there were men and women in the Burlicue. There wasn't just men. They would pretend like they're going to be throwing it out, and then they would look up, and they would toss it to me, and here's this kid that would grab them, and they knew they would get it back after. So that was a little bit of the thing. You know, that was what my life was. And so it wasn't hard coming out for me, but it was for a lot of my friends who I loved and cared about. And I look here today, and I see people I love and care about. You're my family of choice. You know, you're my family here. There's a family of blood, but the family of choice I can really depend on. And that's why the gay pride parades are going on to this day. I'll be marching in about another week or two in the gay pride parade. It'll be my 45th gay pride parade. Because I am proud, and not because the parade is there. It's a statement of my pride and who I am. I don't have to be secretive. I don't have to be afraid who I am today. I can marry the man I love who's sitting in the back of the room. And it's the most wonderful thing that has happened to me in my life. And I didn't think I would ever be able to get married. I didn't think that would ever come about at this time. I thought it would happen maybe at some point, but not in my lifetime. In another month, I'm going to be 79 years old. And I'm really happy to be 79 years old because the plague didn't take me. But I want to tell you all something, those of you who are gay here. And sometimes I hear little funny remarks about the lesbian community and all. They were the ones that took care of us when we were dying, when our own kind wouldn't come up to help us because we didn't know where it was coming from. We were afraid of it. So always remember that. Or remember who helped us and who cared about us at that time. And I always say these things to groups, particularly younger groups, and what it was like to have friends that you've had for years, since I was 9 years old, suddenly die from the plague. And Reagan, who didn't mention HIV until the last 2 months of his double term as president. And when I said, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore, We're not. We're here, we're queer, and it's okay. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about my first day in Silver Lake. I came from New York, from Manhattan, and I asked my best friend, Steve, who was the friend that I knew from 9 years old. His father lived in California, his mother lived in New York. And we were ethnically the same, we're both Ukrainian. And that's where my name comes from. We hung out all those years. So I went to him and I said to him, where would be a good place to go and live? Because I'm moving to California. And he said, well, where are you moving? And I says, to Los Angeles. Where else? And he said to me, Silver Lake. I says, is a lake of silver? And he says, Silver Lake is a very gay community, and you'll be happy there. It was a gayer community at that time. Now, I got here in 1958. It was February 15th of 1958. I arrived in Silver Lake, and I thought it was beautiful. I thought the people were beautiful. The streets were clean, they were nice, it was sun in the sky, and you didn't have to pay to be on the turnpike. And so, in advance, I had arranged to rent the place. I paid for extra. It took us 2 months, a friend of mine and myself, to drive out here from New York. And I rented a little place on Redcliffe Street in Silver Lake. That's right off of Michael Terrain, or Mitchell Terrain. I've never forgotten that one. Anyway, and I had rented that in advance. The first night I was here, I walked from Redcliffe Street down Michael Terrain, over down Michael Terrain, and you know that's a street, and I could do it then. And I got down to Sunset Boulevard because I was going to go get something to eat, and it was at Anna's. That was a little restaurant. It was right, you made a left off of Michael Terrain coming down, and you went right around the corner, and there was a gay bar, and there was this little restaurant that opened up like at 7 o'clock in the evening and stayed open till like 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning. And that was for us. That was our place, because we came out of the bars at late hours at 2 o'clock, and the place was there. And Anna did the cooking, and she was there, and the food was good. So I come around the corner, because somebody had told me about this place. Came around the corner, and there's this convertible driving by, and all of a sudden, I see this looking at me, you know, and I'm going, oh, this isn't bad. And he's driving a little bit, so I walked a little slower. What I didn't notice was there's a second car that also was looking at me that ran into his backside. And I did this U-turn and went right back up the hill and back in the house, because I'm brand new in California and I didn't know anything about it. And I wasn't going to be a witness to anything. So that was my introduction to Silver Lake. But you know something? It really was something. It was beautiful. My next incident in Silver Lake was there was a fire in Griffith Park. I didn't know it was a fire. There was bright lights up there. This is in 1958. So my friend and myself walked down Griffith Park Boulevard towards Griffith Park, and there was a little hill there, and it was kind of, I said, well, let's go up here. This must be something Hollywood, you know, something with the movie industry, with all this lights going and everything. So we started up the hill and went almost, and it was a high hill, almost to when we got to the top. almost to the top. All of a sudden, all these people are coming over the hill, running, screaming at us, "Run!" And the firework came over the hill, and we went running back down. But the funny part about that, once again, Akrons sold plants. Now, the fire burned down a good portion of the Griffith Park that was close to us. The gay men were Akrons buying these plants with shovels, going up and digging holes and putting the plants back into the park. And you all know what I mean. Anyway, my experience here was a lot of love. I had a landlady on Red Cliff Street. She was Japanese, and I had to work, but I couldn't not work until my license and my credentials came from New York in order to get my license here. So I knew jewelry, so I went to work for White Front Stores on Olympic Boulevard, and in their jewelry department. That was in the front of the store, was the jewelry department. And doing that kept me alive until my credentials came from New York, because it was mail. There was no internet. There was no fax me. There was nothing like that. And Silver Lake was a magical place, because we had a freedom that we didn't have elsewhere. There was a camaraderie. This Japanese landlady I had, when I finally started working, and I had my clothes and everything like that, I would come home and I'd do my usual wash and laundry or something like that, and I'd hang them out in the back, and then I'd go to work the next day, because I'd go to work the next day and I'd come back, and they were all folded up and re-washed in there. And she had had a large family, and her family had all left, so she cooked wonderful Japanese food, which I had never had before. And she would leave these beautiful little lacquered trays in my home. And that's the kind of community we had here. And and I said to her, "You can't afford to keep feeding me." She said to me, I says, "I have to give you more money." She says, "No, it's okay." And this woman did that for me for about 8 months.
Yeah.
She used to leave food every night. That's what Silver Lake means to me. That's what living here means. It's the community. It's straight, it's gay, it's lesbian, it's transgender. At one time we used to say transsexual, and that's a derogatory term, because it has nothing to do with sex. It's gender, transgender. I knew Christine Jorgensen down in Laguna Beach, and Christine was a wonderful person. It's transgender, and that's why it's called that today. It's just as insulting as saying fag. So, the funny thing is, when I mentioned being in the Trans Pride Parade, I did that, I think, for 3 years or 2 years. And it was just before Gay Pride Parade. It was about a month or two before that. And somebody came up to me, and they said to me, "Aren't you afraid someone's going to think you're transgender?" And I looked at them, and I said, "What the hell do I care?" I says, "If I was, what does that mean?" How can you dislike somebody in your own community who's part of the human race, who has the right to be whatever they are? I said anybody has the right to hate me because I'm gay, as long as it stops this far from my nose. This far from my nose. You're not allowed to take my civil rights away. You're not allowed to take any part of what the Constitution guarantees me, and you're not allowed to injure me. Now, the thing I talk about now to a lot of our gay groups and things like that is suicide. Kids' suicide for bullying, going to school because they're gay, or they're trans, or they look different, both women and men. We've got to care about that. Too many of our kids are dying by their own hands because of it. And I don't mean to bring you all down with this, but it's a fact. And I'm old enough to care about what happens to somebody else, because someone cared what happened to me years ago. But anyway, if anybody has
Go ahead.
any questions.
I'd just like to tell you that Mother Brian would be very proud of you.
Thank you, Mother Brian. He wasn't a lech, by the way. He just came, he liked talking to the kids, just like I do.
You know, before doing this event with Alexei, I went back and I was doing some research, and in that wonderful book, Gay New York by George Chauncey, there is a lot about Bryant Park. I didn't see any mention of Mother Bryant. I looked in the index, but Bryant Park comes up as a great hangout and a place where gay people stayed in the 20s and the 30s, and so here we have the living embodiment of it.
And the city of New York cut all the bushes out of there, too.
As they did in Los Angeles in Pershing Square.
Yes, that was another place.
Question.
But anyway, Silver Lake.
Another question in the
One
back.
more, I hate to do this, we could do this all night, but the library is closing in 10 minutes.
Okay,
So
I'll do
one
this.
question and then we really do have to wrap it up.
Sorry.
I'm really sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm
will be a
sorry
great-
I didn't allow you all to ask your questions.
Yes, Alexei, you touched upon in your interview that there's a connection between Pride newsletter, which is connected to Black Cat, and the Advocate. I was told by Mark Thompson that the Advocate grew out of the Pride newsletter. Maybe you can elaborate on that.
I would like to pass that to my husband, David. Could you stand, David? Because you can answer that faster than I.
What had happened was, a few months into 1966, an organization formed called Personal Rights and Defense of Education. And their newsletter was the acronym P period, R period, I period, E period, E period. When the raids happened, there were 4 raids within 2 weeks. When the raids happened, there were 3 organizations that got together to put on a demonstration. One was Pride, and one was the Southern California Tavern Guild, which was an organization that called Gay Bars, to raise money for the defense. What they decided to do was to use the newsletter that was already being produced by the prior organization, starting in issue 4, to promote the demonstration. When the demonstration occurred, the organizations didn't go away. They used the Pride newsletter to inform people what was happening now in the trials. And by the end of '67, that was renamed as the Pride Advocate. Shortly afterwards, they dropped the Pride and just became the Advocate. But what happened after that was, when the Stonewall riots occurred in June of '69, in the fall, there was a meeting to determine how to celebrate or how to commemorate the riots that occurred in '69 in the '70s, and that would be 1 year anniversary. And then it gets a little fuzzy because there's multiple versions of this, but apparently what happened was this. Somebody from New York called the people in Los Angeles and said, we were thinking about putting on a commemoration of the Stonewall riots for the 1 year anniversary, which we'd like to be part of. Do you have any suggestion? And in Los Angeles, they said, well, we've already had a Pride demonstration about the riot, about the raids in '67. Why don't we hold another Pride demonstration? So they decided to do that, and the first one was in LA. But there was not a settled name for it, so originally it was called Gay Liberation and Pride. There were other names that stuck, but the only one that stuck a few years later was Pride, and it became the Pride demonstration and then the Pride parade. But that's where the name came from. It pre-existed the raids as the newsletter's acronym, but it continued on, and it continued on to say the Advocate.
Okay.
Just Go ahead, Wes.
You just heard history from the word of the participant and all the words sink in. Give you a couple references. On the 40th anniversary of the demonstration, Boxer Bulletin did a commemorative article which is entitled "The Temerity of a Kiss." It's a wonderful written piece where he sets the rate to the song classical anthem. A smile is just a smile, a kiss is just a kiss. Because it was a kiss, it cost the men 3 to 15 seconds, it cost the men to be arrested. Also, the city's historic cultural monument report is online if you want to read the report. HCM 939 Black Cat Riot gets to it. Lastly, monuments are fragile. When this event was up for designation, the owner only wanted to recognize the facade and the sign, but it was pointed out that what happened inside of the bar, less significant. After we welcomed this dog by the bar when it was under renovation and saw that they were working on the bar, that bar that you see in the Black Cat is the actual bar that the bartenders were dragged over in 1967.
Yes, it is.
So
It
the
is.
city's historic preservation architect requires that it remain in the same place. The parking lot of the Black Cat, that's where the demonstration occurred. I'm not going to be around here forever, but I wanted to pass that information. These are things people should watch.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, it's April 28th, 2009. Today we're interviewing Alexei Romanoff for the Silver Lake Oral History Collective. I'm Michael Masterson, I'll be conducting the interview, and our cameraman today is Bob Herzog. So Alexei, we'd like to just start with, can you give us your full name and
My full name, the three names I use is Alexei Boris Romanoff.
Romanoff.
Romanov.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
that's my full name.
Okay, and where do you currently live?
Right now I live in Pasadena.
Okay. And have you lived in, did you live in Silver Lake?
I lived in Silver Lake for quite a number of years.
Okay, okay. So your life was sort of centered on this part of town?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
it was. Though I ventured up into Hollywood because at the time Hollywood was also very gay.
Mm-hmm.
There were a number of gay bars that we socialized in.
In Hollywood?
In Hollywood, they were right on Hollywood Boulevard and on the
Really?
side streets.
What
yeah.
were they, which bars were they, do you remember?
Oh, there was the Roman Terrace. There was, there was so many of them.
Spotlight.
The Spotlight, of course.
Still there?
There was the Mr. T's,
Uh-huh, I've heard that.
and they were owned by a small group of people, but there was a number of bars that were owned by the same groups of people, same owners maybe, had 2 or 3 gay bars. And usually the owners, unlike New York, who owned the gay bars, were gay here.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't true in New York. It was syndicates that owned
Okay,
the
they
gay
kind of
bars
controlled
there.
it, but here it was
Yeah.
like family owned, right? So,
Well, it made it more comfortable.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it made
So
it more
you have that,
comfortable.
right.
Yeah.
So in '58 you moved here, and then you were working as a nurse eventually.
Yeah. But I worked in the interim there. I also worked at a gay bar in Silver Lake on Hyperion Boulevard that was called the High Spot.
The high spot.
High Spot.
Okay.
And there was a man who helped me there, and we used to call him Mama Tommy. His name was Tommy, and he managed the place. And I did shifts there. I both worked at the White Front Store, and I worked in the evenings there. And I was approached by a woman named Leroy to help her open a gay bar on Sunset Boulevard. And the gay bar then became the New Faces. It originally was Patty's Pub, and it was a local neighborhood bar that was really an awful place. If you wanted to really get drunk and you weren't gay, you went to this place. And we had to close it for 60 days in order to get the old clientele to stop coming
in.
And letting them know that it was they were under new management, and it was called the New Faces. And our logo was the theater logo, the smiling
Comedy and Tragedy.
Tragedy.
Okay. Where was it located?
It is now the Circus of Books.
Mm-hmm.
It was on Sunset Boulevard and Sanborn.
Mm-hmm.
There was a drugstore across the street. It is now El Pollo Loco is across from it there, on the same side of the street, but across Sanborn. And about a half a block from the Black Cat, or the
Barcito. Yeah, Barcito.
Right now,
Yeah.
yes.
So this woman Leroy approached you about
Approached
opening
me
this.
about opening
And how
it.
tell us about her?
She was an interesting woman. She was elderly, I'm sure, at this time, deceased, and she was friendly with the gay community, a businesswoman. It was an interesting experience, and we opened the bar, invested in it, with time and finances, and it turned out to be a very successful endeavor at the time. Like that.
What year was this that it opened?
It had to be 4 or 5 years prior to 1966.
Okay, so 61,
Because
62.
67, 66, 67 was the raid
Okay.
on the two bars
On the two bars.
on New Year's Eve.
Right, okay.
Reagan had taken office, I believe, that at midnight as governor of the California.
So New Faces on the corner, the Black Cat was a half a block down,
Yes.
and what was the relationship between the two bars? Just they were next to each other?
Just next to each other.
Okay.
There was no real relationship.
Do you know who owned the Black Cat then?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. That's how little contact.
Okay.
There were a number of bars. There were bars on Santa Monica Boulevard. There was a place over that was called a Detour, and but that wasn't the Detour at the time. That was another bar, and there were so many bars in Hollywood and Silver Lake and on Melrose, and this is Hollywood Boulevard, Santa Monica Boulevard, Melrose, and in Silver Lake, Sunset Boulevard, and Hyperion, and all of those areas. There was even a bar on Silver Lake Boulevard.
Oh, there was?
Yeah, at one time, a little tiny place.
Oh, where on Silver Lake?
Just where the little business district is down there, just
Where the
before
7-Eleven is.
where
Effie.
before the Silver Lake splits.
Okay, sure.
There.
Right in there.
Yeah, right in there was a gay bar.
I'll be darned.
So there,
Do you remember the name of that one?
it was 42 years
Lost in
ago.
the-
Lost in the memory of more recent
Yeah.
things and in the age.
There you go. Well, so let's go. Let's advance it a couple years. So you started the bar, and that was in the early '60s, and then and it thrived. It sounds
Yes,
like.
it was doing well.
So that kind of, and so Black Cat was obviously drawing patrons too.
Yes.
So now, in the mid '60s, prior to the incident we're going to talk about, was there a sense of openness in terms of being gay, or was it very closeted?
No.
You had to really
This
keep it.
is-
I mean, you say that there were so many bars everywhere.
This is why we went into bars. No bars had open windows to the outside as they might today. Gay bars. They were very secretive. If someone walked in that you didn't know, everybody got really quiet. The clue word was that if someone you didn't recognize came in, don't do anything. And when I say do anything, don't talk to them, don't do this and that.
Right.
Because there was an element of entrapment at the time. And even in the high spot, my friend Steve moved out here a couple of years after I did. And we lived together in Silver Lake on Fountain Avenue. And then he got a partner. His partner moved, and he moved in with his partner. And they were in the high spot. And I don't know if you want certain type of language, but anyway, in this, they were arrested in the high spot. What had happened is that Steve was standing over Sal, who was his lover, and they had beers in their hand. And Steve leaned and spilled some beer on Sal's shirt. Steve went over and was brushing the beer off, and they both were arrested for lewd conduct.
Just for that?
Just for that. There were undercover officers in the bar, and they were arrested for lewd conduct.
So any physical contact was subject to...
And I went as moral support for them when they went to court. And they admitted that they were gay, and if they were going to be doing anything, they would have done it at home. And the officer completely lied and said that they propositioned him to go home with them. And I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to go into the lurid details that the officer implies.
Right.
Because those things weren't done in those days.
And what was the outcome? What happened to them?
They were convicted.
Were they sent to jail? Or
No. They were. I believe they ended up having to plead to a lesser charge, which meant that they wouldn't have to register as a sex offender.
Okay.
That was the big thing. That was the thing that was held over everybody's head. That when you went into court, they would offer you a lesser charge with a fine, and you wouldn't have to serve any jail time, but you wouldn't have to register, most of all, as a sex offender, which will follow you the rest of your life.
Right. Wow.
So that's one of the incidents of entrapment.
So this was going on with some regularity then, it sounds like, that they were
Very
undercover
much so.
officers coming into bars and
Yeah.
doing that. And so,
Yeah.
okay.
And there were numerous bars. There was the Ram's Head Inn, which happened later, but close to that time. There was a little cave. They just redid it. It was an empty building down near Silver Lake Boulevard and Sunset. It was right on Sunset. I just noticed it had been boarded up for years, and it just recently opened as some different business there. But there was a Ram's Head Inn, and there was a little cave. It was a half a block down from it. There was when I moved to California, there was a restaurant and a gay bar right off of Michael Terena, or Mitchell Terena, I forget. And it said both ways. And there was a gay bar there, and there was an all-night restaurant called Anna's. And that was a gay hangout after hours. And that when you got out of the bars and the bars closed, because that was mainly our social outlet, were the bars. I can't impress that as much as I would like to. That it wasn't that we were lushes or that we wanted to get in there and absolutely get drunk, though some people did. It was the fact that that's how we met people. There was no internet. There was no openly dating services or anything like that. There was a thing called a key club where professionals went, and it was a private club, and they would get to meet other people there because they didn't dare go into the bars because they would lose their board certification, their licenses, or whatever it was, physicians, lawyers, things like that.
So that's how they connected.
That's how they connected.
But this must have been, I mean, if there was this much undercover activity, even when you went into a bar, that must have been sort of permeated with that fear. I mean, if you met somebody did that inhibit you from talking to them?
Oh, yes,
I
at
mean,
first you
yeah.
had to get to know them, or if they came in with somebody that you already knew,
Mm-hmm.
that was the difference. That was what we would kind of look for.
Mm-hmm.
There was another place in Topanga Canyon that was called a Canyon Club. It was a little resort. There was a pool there. It was like a country club, but for gay men and women. And they had a huge dance floor. They served food. And we would go there on a Saturday night or on a Friday night. And they had 2 jukeboxes. There were no DJs at any of the bars or clubs at that time. We would go there, we would have dinner. There were 2 jukeboxes, one at each end of the dance floor. When one was playing, men and men could dance together because it was illegal at the time for men to dance with each other.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't dance together. Women could dance together out in public, but men could not.
Mm-hmm.
Like men would get arrested for cross-dressing, but a woman could put a pair of slacks on and a plaid shirt and go out and not have any problems with that. But if a man put a woman's dress on,
Right.
he was arrested.
Right.
You know, even in the gay bars. Now, not all gay bars had cross-dressers,
Sure.
but they were there.
Uh-huh. But at this club in Topanga, then you could.
It was what would happen with the 2 jukeboxes. Men and men could dance, and women could dance there. Gay men, gay women at the time. There wasn't the definition in those days of lesbian and gay man. They called themselves gay women then.
Right.
That wasn't until a little more of the liberation movements the changes happened. So when one jukebox was playing, you could dance all you wanted. But when that jukebox went off and the other one went on, everybody switched partners. The men took up with the women and started to dance. That meant the sheriff's department had come in to inspect the place.
All day.
So we would all
amazing.
switch. And I could remember a time of taking a friend who was a woman and going in when the one jukebox was on, and it was a membership. You actually bought a membership to this club. And I brought a guest in with me, and she was a newly coming out lesbian or gay woman. And we went in and we just started dancing. And in the middle, the one jukebox went off and the other one went back on, and everybody switched partners again. And she just stood there and she couldn't believe this. It was like, what is all of this? Because she had never seen men dance with men.
Wow. So it just blew her mind.
Blew her mind with that. But that was
That's
one of the
amazing.
incidents. And getting back to Silver Lake.
What was the name of the club?
The Canyon Club.
The Canyon Club. Okay.
Canyon
The
Club
Canyon
it
Club.
was,
Okay.
yeah.
Very cool.
And that was around from the 50s clear into the 60s, and then for some reason I think there was a fire or something, and then it had closed. But it was one of the historical and a huge
I've never even heard of
place.
that,
A
actually.
huge
So,
place.
That's great to know.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Dave, let's go back to Silver Lake then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Back in Silver Lake, so there were so many places that we moved from place to place. We didn't just go to one bar and stay there for the whole evening. We would go and kind of like tour around and see different friends and things like that. But we always were on guard. We never were basically openly gay. There wasn't outside meeting places. There were dangers. There was a place called Akron's that was in Silver Lake. It is now Circuit City, across from PBS, Channel 28, in that little shopping center. And Akron's had things from all over the world, like Cost Plus or something like that today. And the gay men used to go in there and do a lot of their shopping to decorate their homes, and to do things like that. Well, we knew if you saw someone come in there with a suit jacket on, They were a police officer, undercover officer, in a store like Cost Plus to check out the restroom to make sure the gay men were not doing anything there. And if they had a suit jacket on, because detectives at that time usually wore jackets. You know.
Fairly obvious there.
Yeah, like the TV shows that you see. They always had bad jackets on at the time. But that was a little bit. And we lived in our communities. These were our communities. These were places that meant something to us. I lived in a number of places prior to moving out of Silver Lake. I lived on Griffith Park Boulevard twice. I lived on Red Cliff Street off of Mitchell Terrena. I lived on Fountain Avenue. My friend Steve went on to live for years on Fountain Avenue. I still pass by his house quite often. And he was one of the people that was taken by the plague that we had. So, and we had been friends since I was 9 years old. Like that, and continue to be friends. We had thoughts that when we got older, and possibly not as attractive as we were at the time, that we would end up living together and taking care of each other. Like that. But you can never make plans like that because things happen. And never did we think there would be HIV in our community. And one of the points is that we're missing a whole community that relayed the information from the prior community to the younger one. There's a whole community in there that's missing, that was the tide, the continuation of the chain to bring us together and to tell them, this is your history. So this sort of thing is really important.
Absolutely.
So that the younger generations will know where we come from and what we did to achieve where we are. I hope in the future it will be better for us. That's my one look. If I look back when I was 14 years old, and I want this to be on this film, there was a man in Bryant Park, New York, off of 42nd Street and 6th Avenue, who was called Mother Bryan. He was 84 years old at the time. I was 14. And he told me what it was like to be a gay man in 1890 in his 20s at that time. And he was the inspiration for me to want to do things in the gay community, because he told us kids who were sitting around him, we used to go down to the automat and sit there with a cup of coffee and listen to him tell us about our history. And someone has to pass that on. Because our history hadn't been written about. Because we were so undercover.
Oral tradition.
Oral tradition. And he was 84 and I was 14.
What did he tell you that had such an impact?
It was being beaten by the police. There were foot patrolmen at the time, and if they knew you were gay, they would wait outside of your house so you couldn't leave and go out in the evening because they knew you were going to be doing something terrible. And they would beat them. And they would meet in small little groups in apartments. There weren't gay bars. There weren't places like that at the time. They would make friends, and one friend would recommend another one and introduce them to somebody else. And it was so closeted at the time. And if they did know you were gay, you were persecuted. You had to leave your home and go somewhere else where they wouldn't know that you were gay. And that's some of the things he told us. And he told us that in your lifetime, if you don't leave your community, whatever community you belong to, he believed this, if you don't leave your community a better place than when you found it, you haven't done anything in your life. No matter how you've worked and what you've done and what you've earned, that means nothing if your community isn't in a better place. If you don't do something And when we appeared by the board downtown Los Angeles, and I testified to them, they asked me why I wanted the Black Cat designated as a historical landmark. And I said to them, so that in 50 years from now, when I am no longer here, some very young gay person can turn around and say, where did my freedom start? Where did I get my human rights? Where did I get my civil rights that our Constitution guarantees us? And there is an actual place like Bunker Hill, Gettysburg, or Selma, Alabama. There's an actual place that he will be able to go to and look at and say, this is in our history. This is the place where some of the freedom started, because anywhere from 300 to 600 men stood up and came out and demonstrated on February 11th of 1967 because of a raid in 2 bars. The largest demonstration that ever had been held in the United States to that date.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I think that brings us to New Year's Eve.
Yes.
To the
Yes.
Black Cat. So can you tell us about this?
I can tell you what I had heard about it, though I was involved in getting people together and the demonstration. I was not there that evening.
Okay.
But what had been reported to me by numerous sources to this. The Black Cat was decorated for Christmas and New Year's. People had come there to celebrate New Year's Eve. A number of men had kissed that evening, a New Year's Eve kiss at midnight. All of a sudden, there were police officers everywhere in plain clothes arresting the people who were kissing. It wasn't that you weren't allowed to kiss. They kissed for, I think it was 40 seconds longer than would be permitted. So they were arresting all the people that had been kissing in there. 2 of the people in the bar ran out and ran down to the New Faces for sanctuary to get away from that. The police followed them down to the New Faces, burst in, asked who the owner was. Someone pointed at Leroy, who was the woman owner of the place. They heard the name Leroy, not as 2 words, but as 1 word, Leroy. They thought it was a man. They thought it was a cross-dresser. They grabbed her. They beat her up at the time. They broke her collarbone. They dragged the bartender across the bar. They put everybody on the sidewalk face down who was in the bar. And I believe at the time, but I wouldn't swear to this, they took pictures of the individuals, which was common when they would raid a bar. They would lead everybody out of the bar, and even the people they didn't arrest, they would take pictures of them to have a file at the time. That happened. The abuse happened. The people were arrested. There were organizations that came to help defend them later on. The defense was not successful. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court refused to hear it. A number of those people had to sign up as sex offenders for the rest of their lives. A number of them had ended up in the hospital because of the beatings. It was claimed that there was resistance. There was no resistance in any one of the bars. Gay people didn't resist in those days there. We ended up meeting a group of us through telephone a telephone tree type thing. We called each other about what had happened. Organizations started to get together. They were small organizations, they weren't large. So it ended up being a group that got together. We met at a bar that I believe it was called the Hub Bar on Santa Monica Boulevard up by West Hollywood. There was the Hub, there was a Circus, and there was the Stampede, which was a very large bar, just east of Fairfax on Santa Monica Boulevard. So we met at the one bar because the owner would allow us to meet there. Well, and a whole group of people got together. We talked about it. We try to encourage people, one person calling 4 or 5 other people. We try to encourage people to come out and demonstrate. It took us from New Year's Eve to February 11th to convince people, enough people, to come out and demonstrate against police brutality at that time. At that point, it was no longer just entrapment. There was brutality. The reason people were also scared, approximately 3 or 4 months earlier on the Sunset Strip, there was a group of anti-war demonstrators who were beat up there and were sent to the hospital by the police at the time. West Hollywood was not a city then. So it was either the sheriff's department or the police, but they beat them up. That was the fear we had. That was absolutely the fear we had. There were 3 things that we were afraid of. First, being beat up by the police. Second, being outed in the news media and our pictures taken and showing we would lose our jobs, we would lose our income, we would lose our homes. And most of all, if our families didn't know, we would be alienated from our family. That's what took us so long. And it was a lot of courage for that group of people, 300 to 600 people, to demonstrate 2.5 years prior to Stonewall in New York.
Alexei, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Where was the media during all of this? At that time, there were 2 daily newspapers in Los Angeles.
None of them showed up to cover the demonstration.
Would you say they were in collusion with the police?
Yes. Yes. Yes, I would. At that time, they were. I believe the only people that covered it were the free press at the time. Now, we had to watch that we didn't step off the sidewalk. We were passing out leaflets. We had signs. I have a picture over here, not an actual picture, but from the Barcito, La Barcito function that we had on February 11th of this year, which was 42 years to the day of that demonstration. I have pictures from that with people holding signs saying about police brutality, blue fascism, stop blue fascism, and things like that. And people talking about what was going on at the time. The media did not cover it at all. They weren't interested in covering our things that were happening to us. We were perverts. We deserved everything we got at the time.
Where was the demonstration held?
Right in front of the bar.
Of the Black
That was
Cat.
the Black Cat, and in the parking lot. We were there. We were up and down the block. At that time I said there was a pharmacy on the corner. We were up and down the block. We didn't go across to where the New Faces was. And both bars shortly after that, because of police harassment, were closed. They were closed. It wasn't that we came out and all of this happened and the police just stopped doing that.
So the harassment continued.
Continued in Los Angeles.
The day of the demonstration, though, did they attempt to arrest anybody? Did they photograph
No,
anybody? Or
no,
so
we
they did let
watched
you.
what we were doing. We didn't want to give them an excuse to charge in and say we were disorderly or we were in violation of laws and things like that. This was, I wouldn't say well planned, but people knew their limits of what they could do. And there were no federal agencies that we could go to and say that our civil rights were being violated at the time. We weren't a protected class.
Far from it.
Far from it. In fact, we didn't become what the courts consider a suspicious class until this past year when they okayed marriage that has been since overturned by Proposition 8. And there was I was demonstrating over here in Pasadena off of the 210 on Lake Avenue prior to Proposition 8, the vote on that. And I had one very nice black man said to me, "Why should I vote against Proposition 8? And I said to him, "Because I was in the marches for your civil rights." And I was. So, and last year I was in the march for trans, their pride march that they had down Santa Monica Boulevard. And I marched at that. And I've been in every one of the gay pride parades since the first one, since we stepped off the sidewalk, almost unscripted in there. I was in every one of the parades to this day.
What year was
in
the
Los
first parade?
Angeles. In the early 70s.
Early 70s.
Early 70s. It's a little blurry to me, so
Sure.
many of them.
So, right.
It's like people say, "Do you remember this?" And did you do this or did you do that at the time? And a lot of times I've done, not that I've done, but we have done so much over the years that it comes together.
Piles on it.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm not finished. And as I said at the Black Cat, the night of the award and everything, I was very touched that the very people who are our enemies now were standing there in the bar and are not our enemies, who are gay men who are in the police department now. And that the city council, Garcetti, thought enough of the incident to come and to give the awards to the people who were there at the time and to see what was happening.
Quite a transformation.
What a transformation. And never did I think. My partner and I were married August 8th of 2008. 8/8/8 of 2008 we were married. And but we had already been together for 11 years, 10 years. You know? And here we were first allowed to marry. I think the shame was the women who had gotten married in San Francisco. They were in their 80s. I think the one was 84 and the other one was 86 or something like that. And they were married in San Francisco, and then that was overturned, saying the courts put a stay on it and annulled the marriages. And the one died before before this year, when we could get married in 2008. She passed away. Was never able to redo that with her partner. And they had been together for 60-something years. I mean, that's the injustice of it. And this history is important to tell the kids that no one has ever given us anything that we haven't had to fight for. And what we don't use, we lose, even though we've gained it. We have to do that.
Well, I think this is particularly important what you're talking about, because the incident at the Black Cat and the New Faces has, I think, oftentimes been sort of lost in gay history.
Yes.
Because Stonewall, a couple of years later, has always sort of pointed out as sort of this turning point, you know, in gay rights.
Yes.
But, you know, I believe that what you did on February 11th of 1967 was a huge turning point in gay rights. Why do you think it has been, why do you think it's not been treated with the same level of...
Stonewall got press
Stonewall.
coverage.
Yeah,
Got
that's
press
true,
coverage. It bordered on a riot, if not a riot. We were peacefully demonstrating our civil rights.
Mhm.
So it wasn't a walk out in the street, in your face, I'm gonna fight you type thing. It was saying, we're mad as hell and we're not gonna take this anymore. That's what we were saying at the time. And these were a wide spectrum of our community. A wide spectrum of our community. You know, they were groups and people who had nothing in common with each other except that they were gay individuals. Men and women.
Well, you demonstrated incredible bravery at the time to do what you did.
We were scared.
Not knowing what would happen.
Yeah, we were scared. I'm not going to say
Mhm.
we did it anyway, but we were scared.
Mhm.
You know, I admire Morris Kite and Harry Hay and some of the forerunners of the things that we had done, the Manishan Society, and the people who demonstrated in front of the White House, only 5 or 6 of them, and things like that.
And the Madison Society was formed in California, I believe,
Yes.
here in
Yes.
Silver Lake.
Yes, yes, it was.
You used
And it used to come in they had a little magazine or a newsletter that became The Advocate, by the way. And the organization that we started, that meeting that came out and demonstrated, we had a newsletter, Pride. That's where the word came from. I have it written out there what it actually means. But it's the first letters of a whole sentence that make up the word pride, and that was the name of the organization.
The original gay pride.
Yeah.
When did the term gay become universal, popular?
It was in the early 30s. It was a lingo that we would use, a language that we would use. There was a whole way that if we were out in public in a little group, we would be able to speak to each other using terms that were common to language, but not used for what they were at the time.
Friends of Dorothy?
Friends of Dorothy, he's gay, and that didn't mean that he was happy. It meant that he was a homosexual according to, society. He was straight at the time, meant he wasn't gay. Though the connotation I don't approve of today because it somehow makes being gay, if you're not straight, there's a crookedness there that isn't there. But it's the same. But it was the language we used. There was another term that's no longer used that was called kai-kai. That means he was bisexual.
Kai-kai.
Kai-kai. He swung either way. And of course there was the proverbial box and basket. And those of you who are gay will know what this means, and I won't go into it. But anyway, those were terms and language that we used out in public, that if there was another table sitting close to us, that they wouldn't know what we were talking about. And to identify somebody who was walking in, that what we call our gaydar, would go off, we would say, isn't he gay? Or isn't she gay? And that would mean that they were homosexual, in our own terms. These people wouldn't know what we were talking about, therefore we wouldn't get beat.
Right.
Or into a fight, or anything like that.
So you had to be in the know.
Yes,
To really,
yeah, you had to be in. I can remember the people who mentored me as I came out at a very young age. I was, like I said, I was on 42nd Street hanging out with a group near Bryant Park and wandering around. And we were all 13, 14-year-olds. You know, people say this is a choice. Being gay is not a choice. I wouldn't have chosen to be discriminated against and have such, not a hard life, because my life was halfway decent, but to have people reject me because they found out that I was in love with a man or I was with a man at the time. I wouldn't have chosen a lifestyle for myself or for anyone else like that. And they say if only you would just stay in the closet and you were quiet. And there were people who were gay at the time in Silver Lake who kept saying to us, if you don't make waves after this, if you just keep quiet, this will all turn over and it will go away and it will get better. It never did until we did something. It never did. You know, the thought that you just have to stay in the closet. And there's a lot out there who don't mind us being gay. They don't want us to be out. They don't want us to talk about it. They don't want it. But you know, it's a lie. I can remember with a lover in New York City, the first time. Apartments were very hard after the Second World War to get in New York. And if you were looking for an apartment, you went to the landlord. There were no leases at the time that you signed and stuff like that. You just went and looked for an apartment. And two men could not, and I repeat that, could not live together without being a relative at the time.
Really?
So we would go into trying to get an apartment. We were half brothers, that's why we had different last names. Different fathers, the same mothers. We thought all of this out. We were cousins, different names, same family. All of this sort of stuff we would come up with in order. And one day where I'm going, I had a lover at the time who was a partner, and we were going to move in together, and we're looking for an apartment. And this landlord showed us the apartment, and he said, so what's the relationship between you two? That was a common question. If two men, two women, nothing. Two men, what's the relationship between you two? And I finally remembered Mother Brian. This was after the fact. And I looked at the landlord and I said, this is my partner and my lover. And he was quiet for a moment. And I looked over at my lover's face at the time, and it was white and this look of horror that you had admitted that we were homosexuals. This absolute look of horror. And I looked back at the landlord. We waited a second. He said, can you afford this apartment? And I thought to myself, this is his out. He's going to say, you guys can't afford this apartment. And we said, yeah, we're both working. And he says, okay, the place is yours. And he handed me the keys. And I looked and I said, thank you, Mother Brian. I will never lie about who I am again. And that was my coming out. That was my outward expression. Though I had never been very secretive in my social life, in my everyday life, I was. That was my coming out.
How old were you then?
If I was 17 or 18, it was a lot.
Wow. That's pretty amazing.
I never lied about it again, or was embarrassed to say, I'm a homosexual or I am a gay man. Because some people didn't understand what gay meant. My own mother didn't understand the terminology when I came out to her when I was very young. I had a relationship, it was one of my first, and I had...
Michael.
Yeah. 2 minutes.
Okay. I had a relationship, I had come out to my mother, and I said to her, you notice that I've been kind of sad the last week or two. And she said, not particularly. Well, I'm failing. I said to her, well, I'm gay. And she looked at me and she was doing something around the house. Now, she had been in show business. And she says, oh? And she walked away. And I said, she don't understand. I ran up to her and I said, I'm not happy. I'm telling you I'm a homosexual. She said, I knew. I said, why didn't you tell me? She said, that wasn't my place. That was your place. She says, remember a lot of the parties we went to? They were gay parties in the village.